For privacy reasons, names and places have been changed. This story is inspired by true events.
On November 22, 1986, Colonel Francisco Herrera, 47, disappeared while investigating military corruption allegations in the Philippines during the turbulent period following Ferdinand Marcos's ouster. The decorated officer had been quietly gathering evidence about illegal arms sales and embezzlement within the armed forces when he failed to return from a meeting with a confidential informant in Mindanao. Despite searches by both military personnel and civilian authorities, no trace of the anti-corruption investigator was ever found. For 8 years, his disappearance remained a mystery that highlighted the dangerous political climate in the post-Marcos Philippines. Then, in March 1994, a property dispute led to the search of an abandoned shed in rural Bataan province that would finally reveal what had happened to the colonel who had gotten too close to powerful secrets. This is the complete story of Francisco Herrera's investigation and the shocking discovery that exposed the deadly consequences of challenging corruption in the Philippine military. November 22, 1986, marked 6 months since the People Power Revolution had swept Ferdinand Marcos from power, leaving the Philippines in a period of political transition fraught with uncertainty and ongoing conflicts between various military factions. Colonel Francisco Herrera, a career officer with 25 years of distinguished service, had been assigned to the newly formed Internal Affairs Division tasked with investigating corruption allegations within the armed forces. Herrera was known throughout the military as an officer of uncompromising integrity who had refused to participate in the corrupt practices that had become endemic during the Marcos era. His reputation for honesty and thoroughness had made him the natural choice to lead sensitive investigations into illegal activities that had flourished under the previous regime. The colonel's current investigation focused on allegations that high-ranking officers had been selling military weapons and equipment to insurgent groups while falsifying procurement records to conceal their activities. The case had potential implications reaching into the highest levels of military command and involved millions of pesos in missing funds and equipment. Herrera had been working closely with Captain Roberto Santos, a junior officer who had discovered irregularities in weapons inventory reports and had courageously come forward despite the personal risks involved in challenging senior leadership. Santos had provided crucial evidence and had agreed to serve as a witness in exchange for protection from retaliation. On the morning of November 22nd, Herrera received a message through secure channels that an informant with detailed knowledge of the weapons trafficking operation was willing to meet and provide documentary evidence that could expose the entire network. The meeting was scheduled for 2 p.m. at a remote location in Cotabato Province, Mindanao. The meeting location was chosen for its isolation and security, situated in a rural area where surveillance would be difficult and where the informant claimed to feel safe from the military personnel he was preparing to expose. Herrera departed Manila by military aircraft at 10:30 a.m., carrying minimal security backup to avoid drawing attention to the sensitive operation. Captain Santos later told investigators that the colonel had been optimistic about the meeting, believing that the promised evidence would provide the breakthrough needed to build prosecutable cases against the officers involved in the corruption scheme. Herrera had indicated that successful completion of this investigation could expose systematic corruption affecting multiple military units. The last confirmed contact with Colonel Herrera came at 1:45 p.m. when he radioed from the meeting location to confirm his arrival and report that the area appeared secure. He indicated that the informant had not yet arrived, but that he would wait at the designated location for 30 minutes before aborting the operation if no contact was made. When Herrera failed to check in at the scheduled 4 p.m. contact time, military communications attempted to establish radio contact but received no response. Concerns escalated when the colonel missed his scheduled 6 p.m. return flight to Manila, prompting immediate notification of senior command about the missing officer. Search operations began that evening with military personnel from nearby bases conducting systematic searches of the meeting area and surrounding regions. The remote location and challenging terrain made comprehensive searching extremely difficult, particularly given the security concerns about operating in an area where insurgent activity was common. The investigation into Colonel Herrera's disappearance was complicated by the sensitive nature of his anti-corruption work and the possibility that his investigation had made him a target for elimination by those he was investigating. The military's Internal Affairs Division took charge of the case while coordinating with civilian law enforcement agencies. Interviews with personnel familiar with Herrera's investigation revealed that he had been receiving anonymous threats in the weeks leading up to his disappearance, though he had not reported these incidents through official channels. Several colleagues noted that the colonel had seemed increasingly concerned about security, but had continued his work with characteristic determination. The identity of the informant who had arranged the fatal meeting remained unknown, as the message requesting the meeting had come through intermediaries and could not be traced to its original source. This raised immediate suspicions that the meeting had been a trap designed to eliminate the investigating officer. Captain Santos, Herrera's primary collaborator, was placed under protective custody due to fears that he might also be targeted by those responsible for the colonel's disappearance. Santos provided detailed information about the corruption investigation but could offer no insights into who might have arranged the meeting or what had happened to his superior officer. The search operation expanded to include civilian authorities and international assistance, as the case had implications for the stability of the new Philippine government and its efforts to establish military accountability following the Marcos era. However, the challenging terrain and security situation in Mindanao made comprehensive searching nearly impossible. Throughout 1987 and 1988, the investigation continued with periodic searches and follow-up on tips and reported sightings of Colonel Herrera throughout the Philippines. The case generated significant media attention as a symbol of the dangers faced by those trying to reform corrupt institutions in the post-Marcos era. The corruption investigation that Herrera had been conducting was suspended indefinitely following his disappearance, as key evidence and institutional knowledge had been lost with the colonel's vanishing. This outcome served the interests of those who had been under investigation, effectively ending the threat to their illegal activities. President Corazon Aquino's administration used the case to highlight the challenges of military reform and the ongoing threats to democratic institutions from entrenched corrupt interests. However, the investigation itself produced no concrete results that advanced the search for Herrera or exposed those responsible for his disappearance. In 1990, human remains found in a remote area of Mindanao initially raised hopes for resolution, but forensic analysis determined they belonged to a different missing person and were unrelated to the colonel's case. Such discoveries occasionally renewed attention to the investigation but never provided the breakthrough evidence families and authorities sought. The case became part of the broader narrative about impunity and violence against reformers in the Philippines, where numerous activists, journalists, and government officials had been killed or disappeared for challenging powerful interests during the country's democratic transition. By 1993, 7 years after Colonel Herrera's disappearance, the active investigation had been scaled back, though the case remained officially open and was periodically reviewed for new developments. The colonel's family had accepted that he was likely dead but continued hoping for answers about what had happened and who was responsible. March 15, 1994, began as a routine day for lawyer Maria Gonzalez, who was representing a client in a property dispute involving land in rural Bataan province, approximately 100 kilometers northwest of Manila. The legal case involved determining ownership of several parcels of farmland that had been abandoned since the 1980s. As part of the property survey process, Gonzalez and her client were examining various structures on the disputed land, including several outbuildings and storage sheds that had been left unattended for years. One particular shed, located in an isolated area of the property, had been secured with heavy padlocks and appeared to have been unused for an extended period. The property owner had died several years earlier, and his heirs were disputing ownership rights while trying to determine what assets existed on the land. Legal requirements for the property settlement included conducting a comprehensive inventory of all structures and their contents. Around 2:30 p.m., after obtaining legal authority to open secured structures on the property, Gonzalez and local authorities broke open the padlocks on the isolated shed to document its contents for the property settlement proceedings. What they discovered inside the shed immediately transformed a routine property dispute into a major criminal investigation. The small structure contained what appeared to be an improvised prison cell, complete with restraints, a cot, and evidence of long-term human occupancy under conditions that clearly indicated unlawful imprisonment. Most significantly, the shed contained personal items that were immediately recognizable as military equipment and documentation. Among these items were identification documents, military insignia, and personal effects that bore the name of Colonel Francisco Herrera, the officer who had disappeared 8 years earlier. The discovery included not only the colonel's personal belongings but also extensive documentation related to his corruption investigation, including files, photographs, and recorded testimonies that had apparently been confiscated when he was captured. The evidence suggested that Herrera had been held prisoner in the shed for an unknown period. Human remains were found in a concealed area adjacent to the shed, along with personal items that appeared to belong to the missing colonel. The remains were in an advanced state of decomposition but appeared to be consistent with someone who had died several years earlier. Local authorities immediately secured the site as a crime scene and notified both military and civilian investigators about the discovery. Within hours, forensic teams and military personnel were examining the evidence that would finally provide answers about Colonel Herrera's fate. Forensic analysis confirmed that the remains found near the shed belonged to Colonel Francisco Herrera. Personal items, dental records, and other evidence definitively identified him as the missing anti-corruption investigator who had vanished in 1986. The investigation revealed that Herrera had been kidnapped during the fake meeting in Mindanao and transported to the remote Bataan location, where he had been held prisoner while his captors attempted to extract information about his investigation and eliminate the evidence he had gathered. Documents found in the shed indicated that the colonel had been interrogated extensively about his sources, methods, and the evidence he had compiled against corrupt military officers. The improvised prison had apparently been designed to keep him alive while his captors determined how much damage his investigation might cause. Evidence suggested that Herrera had been killed when his captors concluded that his investigation posed an unacceptable threat to their operations. The timing of his death appeared to coincide with the suspension of the corruption investigation following his disappearance, suggesting that eliminating him had achieved their objective of ending the threat to their illegal activities. The property where the shed was located was traced to a complex ownership structure involving shell companies and intermediaries, making it difficult to identify who had controlled the site during the period when Herrera was held prisoner. However, the investigation focused on military personnel who had been subjects of his original corruption investigation. The discovery brought closure to Colonel Herrera's family after 8 years of uncertainty, though learning the circumstances of his death confirmed their worst fears about the dangers he had faced while challenging corruption within the military establishment. The case prompted renewed attention to military corruption and the broader issues of impunity that had allowed Herrera's killers to operate without consequence for nearly a decade. President Fidel Ramos's administration committed to pursuing justice for the colonel's murder and reviving the anti-corruption efforts he had begun. Several former military officers who had been subjects of Herrera's original investigation were arrested and charged in connection with his kidnapping and murder. The evidence found in the shed provided crucial documentation that supported prosecution efforts, though some suspects had died or fled the country during the intervening years. The corruption network that Herrera had been investigating was finally exposed through the evidence recovered from his improvised prison. The documentation he had gathered proved sufficient to support prosecutions and reforms that dismantled much of the illegal weapons trafficking operation he had discovered. Lawyer Maria Gonzalez was recognized for her role in discovering the evidence that solved the case and for her cooperation with authorities during the investigation. Her careful documentation of the property settlement had preserved crucial evidence that might otherwise have been lost or destroyed. Colonel Francisco Herrera's story serves as both a tragedy and a testament to the courage required to challenge corruption in institutions where those being investigated have the power to eliminate their accusers. His dedication to exposing illegal activities ultimately cost him his life, but also provided the evidence needed for eventual justice. The 8-year delay in discovering his fate illustrates how effectively criminal organizations can conceal evidence when they have resources and institutional protection. The remote location and complex property ownership had hidden the shed from discovery until legal proceedings required comprehensive property documentation. For Philippine law enforcement and military reform efforts, the case provided crucial lessons about the need for better protection of investigators and witnesses challenging corruption in powerful institutions. Improved security protocols and oversight mechanisms were implemented partly in response to Herrera's murder. The persistence of family members and colleagues in keeping the case active contributed to the recognition of the shed discovery as significant when evidence was finally found. Their 8 years of seeking answers ensured that when the truth emerged, it received appropriate investigation and prosecution. The case demonstrates how anti-corruption efforts can encounter deadly resistance from those profiting from illegal activities, particularly when investigators threaten systematic criminal enterprises that generate substantial profits for powerful interests. Legal and property documentation continues to play important roles in exposing criminal activities, with attorneys and civil investigators occasionally discovering evidence of serious crimes during routine legal proceedings. The intersection of property law and criminal investigation provided an unexpected resolution to a case that had seemed unsolvable. As of 1994, new protocols require better documentation and protection for military investigators working on sensitive corruption cases, ensuring that their evidence and safety are better protected from retaliation by subjects of their investigations. Colonel Herrera's legacy lives on through the military reforms and anti-corruption measures that resulted from his investigation and ultimate sacrifice, while his story continues to inspire those who risk their careers and lives to challenge institutional corruption in the Philippines and elsewhere.